If you're new to this, first I'll introduce myself, Rocky Snyder. I'm here in Santa Cruz, California. We have just recently moved into our new training facility just before the end of 2020. So not all bad things occurred in the year. In fact, we had the light at the end of the tunnel and it's shining bright. So if you're interested, we're right off of 41st Avenue in the Capitola area of Santa Cruz County. And you can come online, visit us in person as well. But we're going to be talking obviously about the lower back, and that's a lot of the type of work that I have worked with clients that have some kind of chronic or acute pain. And on my whiteboard, here is kind of a little list of what we'll be going through. If you're new to these meetups, what I typically try to do is maybe about a 20-minute kind of lecture topic, or we're just talking about different things. And then we get up and we move and we explore movement and find out if this is something that could benefit you or how you move well and where you don't move so well. So first thing we're going to talk about is posture. And then we're going to discuss how the body negotiates movement, because it is a negotiation or maybe a strategy, however you would like to say it. And then we're also going to self-assess how we move. So it's going to be a participation portion here. And then also we're going to try, and once we understand how we move and where we don't move very well, we call those dark zones. And we're going to try and explore those dark zones, see if by just simply moving into places that we don't move, if that has a beneficial effect on the lower back. Now, there may be some type of expectation of signing up for this meetup about bulletproofing the lower back, and I'm going to show you a whole bunch of lower back stretches and strengthening exercises. We're going to be crawling around on the ground, or you're going to be doing a whole bunch of different plank variations if you're familiar with the plank, or you're going to be doing a whole bunch of crunching. Well, I hate to burst the bubble there, but you can just put those expectations off to the side, because your problem is probably 90% of you that are having lower back issues. The problem is not your lower back. I know that there's many of you that have gone into the doctor and gotten the x-ray or the MRI, and they've put it up on the board and they've pointed to this area of your L4, L5, or your L1, L2, or somewhere in that lumbar region, and showed you how the bones are shifted here or there, or maybe you're impinging down on a nerve, or there's some bulging of a disc or a herniated disc or whatnot. But chances are your back just didn't wake up one morning and say, hey, I got a great idea. Let's mess with the body and let's just do this for no apparent reason. There's a cause and effect. And often the case is the lower back is the victim of the crime. It's the brunt of the joke. It's trying to do more than its fair share, and it gets really tired of taking on the troubles of the world, and it starts screaming out in pain. And then of course you go to the MRI and the x-ray and you see, oh, well, here's the problem here. You don't have enough space, and there's too much compression in between these two vertebrae, and they're causing that nerve to create that sciatic pain or that low back pain that you've been experiencing. So here's what we're going to do. We're just going to go in and we're going to shave off some of this area and that area. We're going to open up that space, and then you're going to be out of pain, which chances are it will actually have that nice effect. You will be out of pain, hopefully. And they won't nick a nerve and cause some other problem to occur down your leg or back or whatever, but it's a successful operation. But at no point in time did they actually address the underlying problem as to why that back was in the position it was in. So this is where we're going to talk about posture. I'm going to go to my whiteboard here, and I'm going to make some amazing artwork, and I'll sign it at the bottom so you can have a copy of it, because someday it's going to be worth a tremendous amount of money. So here we go, stick figure 101. We, for the last, I don't know, 1.5 to 2 million years since we've been on 2 feet, have been trying to fight gravity the best way we can. And that means that the body adapts the best way it can to be the most efficient it can be to support your body weight against gravity. Because ultimately, the brain needs energy to survive. And the brain is going to conserve as much energy as possible for its survival. So any movement that demands more energy is something that it's going to try and suppress as much as possible. It will have to expend a little bit more energy every now and then, but it's going to do so in the most efficient manner for its own survival. So over the course of 1 to 2 million years, we've found that this stick figure here, yeah, we can see it pretty well, should be pretty balanced, right? The feet should have just the right shape to them. We have 3 arches in the feet, the inside arch everyone knows about, but there's a little arch on the outside of our foot. And of course, the roof of our foot makes an arch. So we've got these 3 arches, and where they come down, they contact the ground, they make 3 points of contact like a tripod, like a pyramid. Those Egyptian pyramids are going to be in the desert for another 5,000 years or more because it's the most structurally sound object on Earth. In fact, every structure is comprised of triangles, 3 points of contact. And that's the same with our feet. And provided that we have the proper amount of pressure on those 3 points of contact, the shape of our foot is nice and firmly in place with the proper arch. That's going to allow the bones that rest on top of the foot to be balanced above it. So the shin bones above the feet should be going straight up and down at a 90-degree angle. And those knees are really the shin bone meeting the thigh bone. And provided that the shin bone is in its proper place, then it's going to help stack up the thigh bone on top of it. So we should see that the knees are the same height off the ground, and they should not be one closer to the other. They shouldn't be too bow-legged or knock-kneed, but there's this fine Goldilocks space right between those two, that kind of 0 point of balance. And the same thing occurs for the hips. The hip joint should be the same level off the ground as the opposite, so that we have this nice level pelvis. Now here's where it comes into play with the lower back. The pelvis is like, just think of it like a waiter's tray. And on that waiter's tray, you have 24 cups that are stacked on top of each other. The bigger cup is at the bottom, and the cups get a little bit smaller as they get up to the top. Now, on top of the top cup, you've got yourself a bowling ball. And so you've got a waiter's tray that has a stack of cups balancing on top of that tray with a bowling ball on the top of the cup. That is your skull or your head, and that's about how much your head weighs, 10 pounds, give or take a little bit. And the vertebrae of your spine start out small, just below the skull, and they get bigger all the way to the bottom to that tray, like a very slender pyramid. What would happen if, let's just say, well, we got the rib cage too, and we got the shoulders that are balancing on that. We can't forget that. And the head should be in alignment with the spine, right? So everything's right angles. Just going to check my waiting room. Admit all. There we go. So, thanks for my pause there. I think everyone's in. Yes. So our posture is all about right angles. And as long as we maintain as close to a balanced point, then there's not going to be that much strain on the body. Provided that the pelvis is in its proper place, then the spine is going to be more balanced. But what happens if you have a subtle injury? Maybe recent or maybe very long ago in your past. Let's just take maybe a sprained ankle. You sprain your ankle. Chances are you're not going to want to live in that pain, so you're going to try and get away from the pain in a subconscious manner. Your brain's going to go, that doesn't feel good. There's something wrong there. I need to continually protect myself. So I'm going to shift my weight a little bit off of that area onto somewhere else. And that shifting is now going to change every single angle in your entire body. That knee may start to bend, and you get up onto your tiptoe and start limping around. That bent knee might cause that hip to drop down on that side. That dropping on that side might cause the hip to elevate on the opposite side. We might want to try and turn our body a little bit, so now we're torquing or rotating into the pelvis as well. Well, that spine those cups that are stacked on top of each other. Well, now that waiter's tray is going to be shifted over to one side more, tilting on one side and rotating somewhere. What is your back going to have to do? Well, your brain is going, well, I have to stay balanced over both feet no matter where I'm going. So I'm going to have to adjust my upper body to stay balanced over both feet, that base of support. So now the spine is heading off in that direction, but then the spine or the skull says, well, if I just lean over there a little bit more, then I'm just going to have a better way to balance over this problematic area that sprained ankle created. All right, the swelling occurred, the pain occurred, but then everything subsided. Were you able to press any kind of magic button to restore the proper way that you were standing prior to that accident? And the answer is no. And not too many people are prescribed physical therapy that would do that after a sprained ankle. There are those that have maybe gotten a doctor that said, oh, we need to do something about that. But most doctors are going to say, oh, just elevate it, rest it, throw some ice on it, maybe some compression, and then carefully go back onto it. The pain will go away. But nothing has changed. Your body is still in this compensatory pattern. And now this is where negotiation comes into play. In order for me to keep off of this foot, I have to negotiate with all the other joints in my body. Well, what do you think's going on with that lower back? Now, this is actually kind of a true story. I've had at least 3 clients in the last year where we got the ankle to realize that it's no longer injured and to put weight back on it, and the lower back pain went away because they had a new way of supporting their structure. And this is where it comes into play. Like, I'm not going to show you a lot of lower back exercises. We're going to explore the whole body and find out why the lower back is having to negotiate into the hell that it's in right now. So it's really all about how we are an integrative unit, how one area communicates or negotiates with another. Now, we could also add a new injury or experience. Let's just take maybe a surgical procedure, and maybe it's not spinal surgery. Maybe they had noticed that over the course of time, this person was maybe a volleyball player, and the new posture that they've had to negotiate from that sprained ankle years later, say 7 or 8 years later of having this kind of structure, over the course of time of serving a volleyball and spiking it, the shoulder was not in its proper position, and now the shoulder is impinged, rotator cuff tear. They go to the doctor, and then they get their rotator cuff surgery, which is fine. It draws that shoulder back or helps reinforce the areas that were torn. But again, no one's addressing the entire structure. And isn't it interesting that this all kind of feeds back to that initial injury of the inversion sprain of the sprained ankle? So my point here is, do not discount any experiences you've had prior to today, whether it's dental surgery, whether it is a bike accident, a car accident, whether it's falling on ice or slipping somewhere or tripping over the house cat and hurting your knee. All of these are going to create events that are going to make you negotiate a new way of moving. And none of these are going to re-educate or return you to that place that is more balanced. I guess that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to explore that. So we've talked about posture and how the body negotiates. Maybe it's time that we do some self-assessment. Could it be that the restrictions that surround your hips and your pelvis create a need for the lower back to do more or to create a certain shape to allow you to balance over your feet when your hips are in the position they're in? And we could try and hunt down a muscle and blame it for all of your worries and problems, like your hip flexor. You've probably been told you need to stretch out your hamstrings, or you've got weak abdominals. Considering that we have over 600 muscles in the body, to blame one muscle for all your problems just doesn't seem that fair. Could it be that that muscle is not turning on and not trying to do its work because the position that you're currently in? And simply trying to turn that muscle on is not going to re-educate how your whole body is positioning itself. It may help reduce a symptom, but it's just going to kick the problem down the road a little bit. So maybe we have to target the problem and not the symptom. All right, let's do this. I'm going to ask you all to stand up, if you would. For those that can, for those that are in a tremendous amount of pain, you can do this seated. And we're going to try and give you some strategies to work with. But first, we have to know what it is that we're dealing with. So go ahead and kick off your shoes if you would, because those are just, those are earmuffs. They're not going to give us a good idea of how your body is standing in regards to your own body weight. So we're going to tap into where you feel the weight of your body as it relates down into your feet. Because what I'd like to do at the end of this session is we're going to check back in to see if you're the same old person you were in right now, or if you have changed in a very short amount of time. Okay. So with the feet, we have those 3 points of contact, right? But let me see if I can make some bare feet on here. That's not showing up very well. We'll try some black. There we go. There's some feet right there. There's a whole bunch of ways that you can feel pressure down your feet. But if you were standing on two separate scales right now, standing there in your bare feet, and you were to look down at the scale under your left foot and the scale under your right foot, would you see identical numbers? Would they be exactly the same? Like to the 10th of a pound? Or are they going to be different? Now, maybe you've done this in the past. Maybe you're used to feeling this, or maybe this is something that you've done today for the first time ever. And now you're scratching your head going, oh my gosh, yeah, or you already knew this. This is maybe old information, but it doesn't prove to be significant. But do you feel like there's more weight on one leg more than the other? If you feel as if there is a different number under one scale than the other, we know right there that there are some imbalances going on. Even if the numbers were the same, chances are there's still some imbalances going on. We're not perfectly symmetrical. But let's just say, for instance, that you feel more weight over the right foot than you do the left. Certain areas of your body are going to have to travel over in order to get that weight over your right foot a little bit more. And wherever the skeleton travels, the muscle tissue that it pushes into has to open up and lengthen. The opposite would occur when the bones move away. For instance, if I have my hips traveling over to the right, getting weight more on my right foot than my left, the muscles on the outside of my right hip and thigh are getting longer. The muscles on the left hip and thigh are taking up the slack because nothing's pushing into it. So those muscles are shortening. So I've got muscles that are told to be long, and they better actually start contracting, or else I'll continue to fall in that direction. So now they're long and they're contracted, and these are just kind of relaxed, even though they're shortening up, and you might say tight. I'm just going to say short, because you could experience tightness on both sides. One, because the muscles are too long, the other one because they're not opening up enough. So we're going to put the word tight out of the picture for right now, and we can use short and long. So just by knowing where your mass is over your right foot versus left foot might give you an understanding of, well, if that's going in that direction, something else has to be going in the opposite direction for me to stay over my feet. And now we have this whole negotiation thing. So thinking about your feet, do you feel more weight over one foot than the other? Also, let's put your attention on the right foot just to start with. Do you feel as if there's more weight toward the forefoot, like toward the ball of your foot, toward the toes? Or do you feel like it's more in your heels? And out of that, do you feel like there's more on the inside or the outside of the foot? Then do the exact same thing to the opposite foot. Do you feel like there's more weight toward the forefoot, the toes, the pad, the balls, or more toward the heels? Is it more toward the medial arch, the inside arch, the insole, or is it more toward the outside? Is it different from one foot to the other? We use that actually, a lot of information. We've got an electronic force plate that we actually stand people on because we know that every joint relates to one another. So when mass goes in one direction, we pretty understand what that body's going through. And if mass is going here compared to there, then we can pretty much map out what the entire skeletal structure is doing and what's going on with it. We combine that with a posture assessment or a dynamic assessment, which we're about to do, and we get a whole bunch of information about what the body might need. So you already have an understanding of your weight in your feet. So let's transfer up to your hips. We're going to explore the hips and the pelvis, right? The hips are the thigh bone coming into the pelvis, and the pelvis is the bony structure of the pelvis itself. They're not separate, but if we're talking about the pelvis and the hips, we are talking about two different things. So right now, we're going to just focus on the bony structure of the pelvis. What is it like to tilt it forward and tilt it back? Is it creamy smooth? So the front of your belt loop here, when it drops downward and your tailbone kind of lifts up, we call that a forward tilt or an anterior tilt. And when you tuck your tailbone down and the front of your belt loops and the front of your pants drive upward, we call that a backward or posterior tilt. And it's kind of like a seesaw or, one of those teeter-totters in a playground. It should be able to tilt fairly effortlessly in gravity's presence, forward as well as backwards. What's the quality of your tilting? Do you live in a forward tilt already with stretched out, kind of bigger belly and compressed lower back, so you don't have as much to go? Or you're so used to it, you go there, and then going back in the opposite direction releases a lot of pressure off your lower back? Possibly. Just get a sense of what that is like. Give your body an experience of what is it like to tilt that. Now, if you feel your lower back causing some pain or discomfort, chances are that tilt is not occurring the proper way. So that's good information. Not that we want to drive you into pain, but that's going to give us some insight in terms of what we might want to do. So that we can tilt forward and backwards with the pelvis, and you got a good understanding. You might want to write a little note. Like when I tilt backwards, I release that low back pain. That could be good information and a good direction to try and drive the body in order to create less pressure in that lower back. But let's see what it's like to glide the pelvis to the left and to the right. As if you are just level across the left and right. There's not going to be any tilting necessarily going on. It's just, can I glide my pelvis to the left and to the right? Is it even? You might want to think about the weight in your feet. When you go to the right, where's the weight in your feet? And when you go to the left, where's the weight in your feet? Is it the same? Same place here, as well as the counterpart, same place on the opposite side? Or is it different? Do you find yourself having to turn or push back or drive forward in order to glide sideways? Do you feel a stretch on one side but not on the other? Do you feel as if you can keep going in one direction and you almost have to force yourself to go over to the other side? Some good information, some good awareness into your body. And if you find that it's more challenging to go in one direction, maybe that might be a direction you want to explore. I say maybe because I'm not quite sure. Some people could already be over here, and it's really hard for them to go any further because they're already there. Maybe they want to go in the opposite direction. That is easier. There's not going to be a specific recipe for success for every person in the audience right now, because you have lived a unique existence that no other person has experienced. So why are you going to try and take the same recipe that helped this person compared to helping that person? We've got to develop movements that cater to your own body. All right, so you got an understanding of how your body moves side to side. What about how it tilts at the pelvis side to side? And the way we're going to do that, you're going to bend into your left knee and just explore what it's like to allow that hip in that side of the pelvis on the left side to just sink, kind of like dropping into a pail or a bucket. And then straighten that leg back out. Keep it straight as you bend into the right knee. And what is that like to drop that right hip? kind of like doing the merengue, right? Can you allow one hip to drop down by bending into that knee and allow the other one to drop down by bending the opposite? Can you keep your balance in terms of your body weight even over both feet, no matter which knee is bending? Or do you find yourself crashing down on one side, but staying level on the other? Imagine what the lower back has to go through in order for this pelvis to move fluidly and freely. But what you're experiencing right now, most likely, is that there's areas that you struggle to achieve in your pelvis and in the hip joints. And what does that mean for the lower back? Something's going to have to do it if one area doesn't. All right, the last thing we're going to look at in the pelvis is rotation. So try to keep your upper body still, like you're a duck on water. And what is it like to turn the belly button to the left and to the right? Turning the hips and the pelvis, left and right. Is it easier to go in one direction than the other? Is it perhaps more range of motion in one way or the other? Here's the other question that I often ask, and it's very fascinating for me. How is it that you're rotating? And what I mean by that is when you turn your hips and pelvis to the right, are you taking the front of your right hip and drawing it back? Or are you taking your left hip and driving it forward? And then when you go in the opposite direction, when you rotate the pelvis to the left, are you taking the right hip and driving it forward, or are you pulling back with the left hip? Some of you are just going, oh my gosh, I'm only using one hip to do both rotations. Well, what's that all about? Imagine every step you take, you go across the room right now, you walk around, and everything that we've achieved right now in terms of assessing, tilting the pelvis forward and backwards, gliding it to the left and to the right, tilting it left, tilting it right, rotating left, rotating right, those all should occur every time you walk across the room. And now you're experiencing something quite unique. You're realizing, wait a minute, if I'm missing this part of my ability to move through my pelvis, then what does that mean when I'm walking? If I can't achieve that as easily as achieving it on the opposite side or forward as I do backwards, how is that affecting the way I move? And considering that you take anywhere between 5,000 to 10,000 steps every single day, what's being reinforced in your frame by walking in the way that you found yourself walking? Because everybody walks differently. You know, everybody limps to some degree. No one walks purely perfectly. But it's to what degree are we limping that is going to create greater degrees of negotiation, wear and tear, and then eventually pain. What I'd like you to do is just walk around the room for 1 second. We'll take like a 10-second break for you to experience what is that like to walk around. Is there more pain? Is there less pain? Do you feel like there's no change whatsoever? Because in truth, just simply by tilting your pelvis forward, you were able to lengthen the tissue on the backside of the hips and thighs. And by tilting the pelvis backwards, tucking that tailbone down, you began to explore what it's like to open up the front of the hips and thighs. When you glided off to one side with the pelvis, these muscles got to experience length, and these got to experience what it's like to shorten. And when you glided to the other side, you did just the opposite. When you tilted the pelvis by bending into one knee, the outside of the standing leg, the straight leg, those muscles here got to experience what it's like to lengthen and support you. And the opposite occurred. And of course, when you rotated, a whole bunch of muscles had to lengthen and then shorten when you went the other way. So just by doing this simple assessment of the pelvis, forward, backwards, side to side in two different directions, and then rotating, you really got to explore what it was like to open up tissue in a very subtle but very powerful way. Now, check in with your foot pressure once more, if you would. As you stand there, I'm just curious, has anything changed? If you were standing on those two scales, one under each foot, have those numbers changed? The pressure that was in your right foot, is it still exactly where it was? I'm not asking for dramatic changes, but is it different? And the same holds true for the left foot. Just by assessing the movement of your body, have you changed how your body is supporting itself? Now, we just explored the pelvis. We can explore more. And then we'll go into some strategies too that we might want to consider. Some very basic things to relax that lower back, to give it a little bit of a break. We'll also try and unlock other areas. But the pelvis, well, it connects the spine to the rib cage. And the rib cage, connecting that spine upward, goes right to the skull. So it might not be a bad idea if we explored the movement of our rib cage and then explored the movement of our skull. Because if I'm stuck here, what is that going to do to my lower back? And for that matter, if my head does not move freely, what might that do to my lower back, considering this is the bowling ball on the top of all the stacked cups? So let's get to the rib cage. How about that? Just for a quick show of hands, I'm just going to change this to a gallery view on mine. Just a quick show of hands. Anybody notice any changes in their foot pressure? Oh, look at that. Everybody that I can see said yes. Neat. Well, how cool is that? And you just did a couple little things to just free up the hips. We'll see how that back feels. Let's do the rib cage. So the rib cage, basically the same movements. What is it like to tilt it forward and backwards? What's it like to go sideways? And what's it like to turn? So the axis of rotation, the 0 point of motion, is kind of like right in the middle of my rib cage, right here. What is it like to tilt the rib cage forward and tilt the rib cage back? And as you see in my profile, how I'm tilting it is not by bowing to the audience or leaning back and swaying back. I'm trying to keep my rib cage directly over my hips and my pelvis. And by tilting the rib cage forward and backwards, we're also exploring what it's like to flex your spine and what's it like to extend the spine. This is coupled with movement in the pelvis. When I tilt my pelvis backwards or tuck the tailbone under, that is coupled with my rib cage tilting forward to create flexion in the spine. This is not a bad position. Unless you live here all the time, you may need a vacation from this spot. Just like the opposite, tilting the pelvis forward encourages the rib cage to tilt backwards, creating extension through the spine. You might see this in a fellow with a very large beer belly or a woman who's expecting a child, right? It's a nice place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. What I'd like to do is be able to explore both ends of the spectrum. Can I flex my spine and tilt my rib cage forward as freely and evenly as I can do the opposite? So what is that like for you? Do you find that the entire spine is flexing? Or is it only in one particular area where you're getting all your movement? One juncture that is probably an area that gives you trouble, because that is where you get all your movement in your spine from. Maybe one little place in the vertebrae, maybe a couple. But wouldn't it be nice if they just shared the load, invited more friends to the party, got the whole spine to feel what flexing is like? That should feel really nice. And then extending should feel equally nice. Okay, now the rib cage can also lean to the side, left and right. But before we do that, I want you to imagine that you're in one of those bank teller tubes, those plastic tubes of the drive up, and you're the canister. So I don't want you to slam against the walls. Can you rotate from your sternum to the left and to the right? Can you just get that rib cage to tilt sideways, one direction and then the other? Try not to Lean left to right, but try to keep your head pretty much in one place as you tilt back and forth. Watch that you don't drive your shoulders and mask the fact that there's nothing occurring here. Do you find that you tilt well sideways on one direction, but you don't tilt and the shoulder lifts up on the other? Come to think about it, this is where I hold all my tension, maybe. This is what always gets me trouble. Could it be that this is always trying to do something for this? It's a negotiation. So, good information. When I tilt to one side, muscles down the side of my body and my corset have to open up. Other ones on the opposite side have to shorten. The opposite occurs when I go the other direction. If I have a tendency to be over one leg more than the other, I might have a tendency to be more long on one side and short on the other, and then my lower back is giving me problems. So wouldn't it be nice to just explore this? Can I open up my body from side to side? I might take an arm up and feel what that's like to open that area. Just a strategy. The last one with the rib cage is, what is it like to rotate? Because as you can tell, we're not addressing the lower back so much as we're addressing how the spine moves as it connects to the pelvis and the ribs. So how do you rotate? Now you can take your head along for the ride if you'd like to, or you can keep it straight ahead. But try to keep your hips straight ahead and just turn the ribs. What does that feel like? Do you find that you can rotate right on top of that vertical axis here, but that you shift over to one side to rotate the other way? Can you stay right on top of that vertical line? How do you rotate? Do you pull back with this side or you drive forward with this side? And when you go in the opposite direction, do you pull back with this side or you drive forward with this side? Maybe like the hips, somebody noticed, oh, I'm only using my right side to rotate my pelvis. You might be experiencing the left side only rotating the rib cage. So now you're very dominant in one hip and one shoulder, and the other two aren't going along for the ride, or they are going along for the ride, they're just not participating as much. So wouldn't that be nice if we got them to participate, to actually balance out the movement, because we move very much through rotation in order to go to a straight line. Legs swing forward, one swings back, and arms do the same. So if I'm struggling to rotate in one direction, how does that feed into my lower back? Okay, time for the skull, our last assessment before we get into some strategies. So the skull, can we tilt it forward and backward? And can we keep our ear more or less directly over our shoulder? So tilting it forward and tilting it backward. You'll see my chest drops down as my chin goes up, and my chest goes up when my chin goes down, which feeds into spinal flexion and extension. If I struggle to tilt my skull in one direction, I might struggle to create movement in my spine in that direction. Or I might demand more of my spine because my skull won't move such a way. Maybe I've spent a lot of time in front of the computer in an office setting, and I've been locked into that position. Could it be feeding down into my lower back? That's why we do ergonomic workplace stuff, right? We're trying to make the best jello mold we could fall into as we work in front of a computer. But actually moving may be a better solution. All right, so now the tip of your nose is your axis of rotation. What is it like to tilt your head to the right and to the left? This also sends a chain reaction down your spine, into your rib cage, and into your pelvis, and all the way down to your feet. Everything is being affected. So what does that feel like? For most people, this is where you get gunked up. They're like, oh, I can barely move. It's not surprising. What about rotation? Just moving your skull left and right. Let's try this, just as one of those strategies. If you struggled to rotate your skull to the right, what I'd like you to try and do is just take your left foot and step forward. Bring some weight onto that left foot by bending into the knee a little bit. And then try your rotation to the right once again. If you struggled rotating the skull to the left, do the opposite. Take a right foot forward, put some weight onto it, bend into the knee, feel that weight there, and check out your rotation there. Was there any improvement? Chances are there probably was, because we encourage the spine to rotate in a certain direction by having one leg forward compared to the other. And the pelvis and the skull, they're supposed to move identically with one another at the same time when we move through space. The rib cage is caught in between, and the rib cage has to move in opposition to what the skull and the pelvis are doing when we walk. And this oppositional motion, rotating one direction or another, tilting forward, tilting backwards, moving sideways, this is what allows the muscles to lengthen and shorten. What happens if we have the rib cage not able to rotate opposite of the pelvis, but it's kind of gunked up there? Then the muscle tissue never opens up. There's never very much movement. There's a lot of stagnancy, and stagnancy will bring inflammation. And the next thing you know, you've been told you've got arthritis. And then they say, well, you can take these pills for that, and don't do these activities because they'll aggravate it. So let's not follow that rabbit down the hellacious hole that it will go down to. Know that by creating oppositional movement in the body, we bring breath and circulation and neural stimulation and opening and closing of the body and this kind of inhale, exhale of all the areas of the body, provided we can create this cog-like action of opposition, which interestingly enough is where we're going to go to now. When we're talking about cog wheels, we're talking about two wheels, one moving clockwise while the other moves counterclockwise. And that is how we create movement in our body. In order for our spine to extend, the pelvis tilts forward, the rib cage tilts back. When our spine flexes and curls, the pelvis moves the opposite way, and the rib cage does the same, moving it opposite to that. And the head, in order for the head to stay level, it's got to move opposite the rib cage, allowing length in one area or length in the opposite area. And what we've done with this assessment is we've introduced you to oppositional movement just by exploring these. So before we get into some other activities and movements to experience, check in once again with your foot pressure. I'm kind of curious. Has it changed any? Does it feel different? Now, remembering when we started at this hour, what your normal was what you initially felt. All right, that's where you continually circulate in. Your normal had weight here or there, not necessarily everywhere. So if we gave you different stimuli and your brain said that's actually easier, more efficient to support this weight against gravity, then now you're into a new normal. And that new normal may not feel normal at all. You may feel off balance right now. But that's your new normal, which hopefully will be reinforced over time, and it won't feel as strange. Hopefully that makes some sense. All right. I see there was a note on the board here, on the chat room. I'm going to write down the podcast and the YouTube channels right now while I remember it. We've got in YouTube, it is Rocky Snyder. Simple enough. That's the channel right there, Rocky Snyder, CSCS. Afterwards, it stands for Certified Strength Conditioning Specialist. But you just go to YouTube, subscribe to it. I've got literally hundreds upon hundreds. And if you were one of those that has supported me by buying the book that I wrote last year called Return to Center, then all the videos that are embedded into the book through QR codes, I've got about 160 videos that pertain to all the movements and the assessments and so on in the book that you can go to. And then for podcasts, I have the Zealous podcast, Zelos, which is a Greek god similar to Nike, one of the winged gods. And if you're into the behind the scenes of sports and so on, I interview strength coaches and physical therapists and athletic trainers and the like from the NFL, Major League Baseball, NHL, Olympics. This week was Cirque du Soleil, strength conditioning coach for the Las Vegas shows. And then I've got another one, which is all about anatomy and motion. And a lot of my colleagues I interviewed there. And if you're old enough to remember the Rockford Files in the 70s with James Garner, well, this is very similar. It's kind of a spin-off. I call it the Rock Fit Files. And that's another podcast. They're all about 45 minutes in length, give or take a few. So YouTube channel, Rocky Snyder, the Zealous podcast, we're behind the scenes in the sports world, and to the Rock Fit Files for anatomy and motion and different fitness related things. Okay, so let's do this. One thing I wanted to share is if you get into trouble with your lower back and it is very symptomatic and problematic, there's always a place you can find. It may take a little while, but there's always a position you can be in where there's not going to be any pain. There's always a place you can be in. Now, one of the most common places is called the neutral back, or in the Egoscue method, they may call it the static back. And that is where you are going to be lying down on the floor or in bed with your legs raised so that your knees are directly above your hips, right angles. Remember, we were talking about posture before. So I typically here in this studio have these wooden boxes, such as this, and I will put this on the floor and I'll have somebody lay down on their back and they'll rest their calves and their legs and their feet will be off here. And they'll just be resting in that position. It's a very powerful place to kind of relax the body. So if you want to try it now, you're welcome to it, because I'm just going to continually banter on for the next 5 minutes or so. And then we can field some Q&A after that. But this static back, lying down, the weight of your upper body is being supported by the floor. So gravity is now, yes, still there, but you're not having to negotiate or work so hard to stay in the presence of gravity. And the weight of your legs being at right angles is being supported by this box. So it's a very calming, neutralizing place in which to find yourself. And if you find yourself with your lower back in spasm, while you're in this position, we may want to just activate a little bit of the muscles surrounding your pelvis. Remember, if we wake up the pelvis and get it to move properly or just be awakened, then the lower back may not have to compensate or negotiate as much. And the nice thing about being in this lying down position is that that lower back is now getting to rest toward the ground. So all the muscles that are surrounding that spine, the ones right here that are always kind of crimping up for most people, are now given a reprieve. And they're now opening up and relaxing. So that may be one way in which you could find some nice pain-free place to be. Then what you might want to do in this lying down position is take a pillow off the couch or off your bed, fold it in half. So it's about the width of a basketball, volleyball, something like that. And it's got some firmness to it. And you're going to place it right between your knees, both knees. And you're going to kind of clamp on it just gently so it's not going to go flying out from between your knees. And while lying down in this position with the pillow or between your knees, you're going to start squeezing both knees against it for 1 second and then relax a second. Squeeze a second and relax a second. You might want to try 5 to 10 or 15 repetitions. If your lower back starts talking to you, it's because you're being too aggressive and you don't need to squeeze the living daylights out of your pillow. You just want to give it a hug, a cuddle. So it's just knee cuddling is maybe what you might want to call that. As soon as you're done with 10 or 15 of those, then try and just contract your buttock muscles, pinch your cheeks together for the same amount of repetitions. Squeeze for a second, relax. Can you just get those muscles engaged? And the same rule would hold true if you feel your lower back while squeezing your gluteals or your buttocks, you're doing it too hard. We just want to just encourage the muscles around the pelvis and not the lower back to try and volunteer. And you can alternate between these knee squeezing or cuddling and the glute squeezes back and forth. And most likely it will get your back out of spasm. And that may be just a beautiful way in which to allow your body to just kind of reset in a way, and get the muscles around the hips to do what they should do. So that's for people that are very symptomatic. You know, you get some tension back there. There's no good way of sitting or standing. Just go ahead and get into that position there and try and lie on down. Now, speaking of the hips, we'll try a couple of things there too that might help open things up. But I will tell you also that that YouTube channel that we have, if you go to the playlist that is all about COGS, C-O-G-S, then you're going to explore a whole bunch of other movements. So you've got this library of free videos that you can start to explore and assess yourself before and after to see if this is feeling good for you. Because I'm not going to be by your side, and you're just going to have to kind of select, see what that's like, assess and reassess. But I'll give you two more things. Using that box that we're using for the static back, I'm just going to bring us back a little bit further out so I can get down to the floor here. And I'm going to take that box, and I'm just going to put it right behind me. And what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to see what it's like to be down on one knee with the other foot forward. Now in this position, I want the hip to be directly above the knee that's on the ground. And my waistband, I don't want it to tilt down in the front. In fact, I want to try and encourage it to lift upward so that my pelvis is level from front to back. By doing that, one, we're going to open up space in the lower back, but we're also going to open up the space in the front of your hip and thigh. If you don't feel that much opening tissue here, and that's where we bring that box into play, by bringing the foot up on an elevated surface behind us. I know a lot of people will be in this position and they're going to try and just drive their body forward to achieve a stretch. But it's not going to be all that great of a way of doing it because for one thing, that's going to compress your lower back. So instead of trying to go the extra mile forward, just in this position, level off the pelvis. And then you should begin feeling a whole bunch of change occurring in the front of the hips. And some of those muscles actually attach to the discs in your lower back. That's psoas muscle. And it's going to be opening some space there, reducing the pull on the discs in the lower back. What we can also do is take the same side arm and reach. Try and touch the ceiling. So we take all the compression of the upper body coming down into that hip and lower back and lifting and decompressing that side. Here's the kicker. Chances are, though, you have chosen the leg that you're really good at. So if you're doing this along with me, go ahead and switch legs now and do the one that you really need. You're going to feel a difference. You'll probably start smiling, going, oh my gosh. Because subconsciously, we are creatures of habit. We have patterns of movement. So when I ask somebody to get down on one knee, they're going to get down on the knee that they're best suited to get down on, not necessarily the one they should be on. Now, of course, that may be a lot of pressure for some of you if you've got little cranky knees, which is kind of goes along the territory with somebody who has a cranky lower back because the hips are in between. And the lower back, if that's not compensating, the knees might. It's not always the case, but it's a very common thing for people that have funky knee pain to have lower back problems. And the common place in between is a restricted area in the hips. So if you want to put a cushion underneath the cranky knee, that might help. So simple thing there. Can we open up the hips to reduce strain in the lower back? Can you go through some of the COG-like assessments to give the body an experience of how it's integrated and not isolated, and allow the lower back to understand that, hey, I've got a whole bunch of areas that are willing to work with me as soon as they begin unlocking more and more. Now, the other one that we might want to explore using the box or a chair is I'm going to place it in front of me now, and I'm going to have it so that one foot is on top of the chair, the seat. And I'm just simply going to encourage that foot to pull back toward me, which is going to encourage this knee to go into a straight line or extension. And we've been told through several gym classes and trainers over the year that we really want to stretch out our hamstring. So go ahead and tilt forward into the pelvis, but that never feels good. In fact, it feels like there's something wrong with that. Why should it be burning and feeling so bad? Well, the answer is it should not. And another story of that is that when our leg swings forward as we walk, our pelvis tilts backwards, the tailbone tucks under. So what if we were to do that? What if we were to tuck our tailbone down the way in which we naturally move and walk through space, so that the moment this heel should strike the ground, we're tucking here, which is going to flex our spine and decompress that lower back. And then from this position, can I push my lower back and my ribs back while at the same time reaching forward with my hand? And then can I just come up from that position? Can I tuck the tailbone down, push the rib cage back, and reach forward so that the hand and the rib cage move in opposite directions? They're moving away or they're coming together. And what does that feel like? You could try the other side. And it's always great to have something to hold on to. So I have many points of contact, so my muscles will relax a little bit more. And can we make this inviting? If you're feeling this burning, tearing, your body is saying, oh, you're doing it wrong. And let's just check in. Is the tailbone tucking under? Does that reduce the burning? Great. Am I trying to be too aggressive and forcing it to happen? Or can I be more inviting and just experience what it's like to tilt my pelvis underneath in the tailbone while my leg stays straight? Now, these are just a couple of strategies that we use, and they're not the end-all be-all. They're not the panacea necessarily, but they're a starting point for you to begin to explore and understand that your lower back, perhaps for some time now, has been isolated. It has not been communicating with the foot or with the wrist or the shoulder or the knee or any other part of your body. It's been feeling like it's alone in the world, and it's screaming out. And it's screaming out in pain perhaps, but just screaming out for some attention, letting you know that something's not quite right. So can we incorporate a different approach and maybe a different philosophy or mindset, that the problem, is the fault is not in the stars. The problem's not in our lower back. It could be elsewhere. So I'm going to go to the chat room right now. Oh, Darren's saying the foot pressure is more symmetrical. That is awesome. Posting YouTube channels. I will put this on the YouTube channel probably in the next week or so. During the pelvic rotation, I recognized that my left hip was doing all the work. My right hip was only passively moving. How awesome is that? What a great gift. You've just sensational awareness that you've brought to your body. Now, whether you know what you can do with it, well, who knows? But at least you have the awareness that's a huge part of moving forward. The foot pressure is more. Any suggestions for sciatica? Yeah. Okay. I don't like to treat a symptom. Chances are the sciatica, which is a bundle of nerves that come out of like L4, L5, S1, 2, 3. There's something going on with how your body is positioning itself against gravity, the way in which you're creating strategy to support yourself that is feeding into that sciatic nerve, impinging or whatever. Maybe it's the piriformis muscle, and you could follow that all the way around. But what if you were to just balance out your body a little bit more? Would the symptom remain the same? I do have a playlist on the YouTube channel. It's called Quick Hacks. And just actually this past month in December was all about the hips. And there's one about sciatica. A couple things you could try to explore, a couple of movements on the floor, maybe standing up, that you could start to see, well, maybe is the issue so much about I have a discrepancy between the tension in my left hip versus the right hip. If I balance that out, what will happen with the sciatic symptom? I think it really comes down to bringing awareness to areas. And one great way of bringing awareness, which we didn't mention, was tactile sensation. So what might be nice is as if you were dry sponging or in the shower, just just rub all over your body with your hands. Wake up the nerve endings that surround that are all through your skin, because there are some areas that you explored today you have no sensation of. There's areas on your foot that you don't have pressure in. And so anything that doesn't have movement, the brain loses awareness. Kind of like sitting here in this room, if something were to fly by past me, your attention would automatically be drawn to it. But because these are inanimate objects, the only thing you might see is the shadows behind me, and then your attention will get drawn to it. The brain just works that way. I recently started holding bridge position for longer periods of time to work on glutes in an attempt to address some low back pain. Love listening to you. Can't wait to get your book. Oh, thank you very much, Darren. That's great. Yeah, bridging can be good. It's one side of the coin, right? That would be heads. The tails would be, how do we turn on the glutes when they're lengthening rather than just going from neutral up to a bridge and shortening. And if we think about how the human body moves, it must lengthen before it shortens. So another one I'll throw out there for anybody looking to achieve more glute strength to reduce anything off their lower back would be, I'm going to bring us back a little bit further. Imagining that you're in the bowling alley and you slide one leg back behind you. I'm going to take the same side arm and I'm going to reach. So all my weight is balanced on this leg. I have the foot on the floor just to act as a kickstand. And I'm going to reach and bring it around to the opposite side while this palm goes facing upward and putting all my weight on that forward leg. And then from there, I stand on up again. Now you can use a paper plate on carpet at home. I'll do it from a forward position here. So my back leg is going to go off and slightly behind me to the opposite side, and then loading on up. This is one of the better ways to actually turn on your gluteals without putting a lot of pressure on the lower back. And considering it's the largest muscle of the body, if it's not working the way it should, well, then neighboring areas might try to take on more work. So getting those glutes to feel what it's like to lengthen and load your weight and then come out of it. The bridge is okay, which is good, but it's just one part of one piece of the puzzle. Let's talk about the abdominals. That's, Barbara, fantastic. It's something that I wanted to bring up, but I neglected, and I'm glad you brought it up. So the abdominals, just quick little breakdown of anatomy. They attach to your 5th, 6th, 7th lower rib cage here, and they come down and they attach to that pubic bone right above the naughty bits, just a few inches down from the belly button. Now, if you are extending through your spine and you got that kind of walk like you're expecting a baby or you had too many Budweisers, whatever you want to call it, those muscles are going to be stretched out. Or if you're in Miami at a retirement facility and you're walking around this way, well, those muscles are going to be too short. And so we want to have that nice Goldilocks place where it's not too short, not too long. But the interesting thing about the abdominals is that they control how much I bend backwards. And then they will bring me back up when I'm on my feet. Also, when I'm on my feet, when I lean over to one side of my abdominals will lengthen while the other one shortens one side. And then when I go the other direction, these are going to shorten while these lengthen. And when I rotate, I'm going to have more length in one side than I do the other side. And if we're talking about how we are humans and we move, then we want to train the abdominals to behave in the proper way. So although we didn't specifically talk about the abdominals, when you were tilting your pelvis forward and backwards, or your ribs forward and backwards, you are getting the muscles of the abdominals to experience what life should be like, lengthening and shortening. When you saw what it was like to tilt the pelvis down on one side by bending into the knee and vice versa, or tilting the rib cage off to one side than the other, you got the experience of what the abdominals should do there. And of course, we also assessed rotation. So by doing those cog-like actions, you got the abdominal muscles to experience their role in movement. Now, laying on the ground and doing a whole bunch of crunches can be a useful tool, but we don't live on our backs. unless you live in the red light district, which I don't believe anybody here in the audience does. So maybe we don't want to do a whole bunch of lying down exercises. We may choose to do a few of those to isolate an area, but then we better try and understand its role integrated in movement. That is the abdominals. What should the abdominals do? So one thing we could do is take one leg forward, one leg back. That turns our pelvis in one direction. We could reach one arm up, so that tilts the rib cage off toward my forward leg. And I could take my other arm and reach on back. That gives my abdominal wall a three-dimensional experience of length, especially on one side. And then I might switch legs and do the same thing the opposite side. Getting my weight on my left leg, keeping my right leg straight behind me, reaching up with my right arm and rotating my left arm back behind me. The plank exercises can be useful, but I do a lot of abdominal training when the person's standing on both feet or one foot. And I want the abdominals to understand that their role is not to simply crunch, crunch, crunch. Their role is to work with all the other muscles that surround the corset, as well as the bony structures of the ribs and the pelvis. Unfortunately, doctors and physical therapists work from an open chain anatomy book, meaning they look at the body as it lays on a floor as the foot is off the ground. And it's only one side of how the body moves. There's also what's called closed chain, where the feet are on the ground. The body behaves in a completely different manner. So we have open chain movements and closed chain movements. And for decades and decades, the exercise and rehab world has been focused primarily on open chain. And that's why we do sit-ups to help our lower back. That's why we do knee extensions, leg extensions on a machine, lifting our foot up with a pad to work on our knee. But rarely does that actually ever occur when you're moving through space. It's the closed chain that we've been focusing on today.
Before you go, our new book, Return to Center, breaks down everything we did today and a whole lot more. So check it out at rockysnyder.com. Our link is on our page too. If you still haven't subscribed to this channel, please do. Thanks for watching.